Hi, and welcome to Megan's Mystical Mashup. I'm Megan Rounds, your host, and we have a really great show today. I'm so excited that you're joining us. Today's guest is a healing artist with a palette that includes energy healing, massage therapy, empowerment coaching, and spiritual teaching. And I have to say, healing artist, love that title. Using her gifts of claircognizance and clairsentience, she senses physical symptoms in others using healing modalities such as energy healing and massage to clear them. During her year and a half in the lab, she has become a designated practitioner and lab moderator and spends most of her time in the main lab and the circle, as well as some certain lab-related course groups, such as the Psychic Development Circle, which both of us are facilitators in. So, little plug for that. She resides in Edmond, Oklahoma, with her best friend and only child, her dog Griffin. Please give a warm lightworker welcome to Nicole Powers. Hi.
Hi. Hello, Megan.
It's so great to see you here today, and I'm multitasking, so excuse me for just 1 minute while I cut and paste your stuff, because I've learned, I used to be really good at it, and now I'm not so good at it anymore.
Yeah, and I've got to move my camera. It's strange. Okay. Why am I so big? My face is huge on here.
Well, it's all the better for us to see you.
That's true.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me today and us today. I hope. Good. Well, so I'd like to start out every show, and sometimes it ends up taking the entire show, by talking about your spiritual path and or your path to the Lightworkers Lab. Sometimes those things are the same, and sometimes they seem to be slightly different, so whichever one is longest and more involved is the one we want to hear.
Okay. So my journey, actually the lab has been like kind of a next level in my journey, but my journey started long before I came across the lab. And the lab, of course, in every journey is like, if you think about a hero on a story, like some of your stories, they all have this protagonist and this hero in them. And so in my story, in my spiritual journey, the lab came along at the right time, just when I needed that next little, I was searching for something different, and the lab came along, and I've learned so much from being here. But my journey really starts, it's been a lifelong journey, I would say. I'm one of those people who, I believe that for me, I came into this world knowing that there was something bigger than me, that there's a God. And I called that God. My family is not religious. They are, I would say they're spiritual in their own ways, but it's not something we talk about as a family. God is rarely mentioned. We maybe pray on the holidays. We go to church. I think I've been to church with my family a handful of times in my life, so spiritual things in our household are not common. It's not the way that I was raised. I moved to Oklahoma when I was in the 3rd grade. And everyone in Oklahoma, one of their first questions they ask, the new kid is, what church do you attend?
Wow.
And I didn't. So I was like, and I felt really awkward. Everybody goes to church. They all are very proud of what denomination they are in Oklahoma, and they all want to invite you to church. And for me, that was strange. That was very strange. And I started going to church with some of my friends because I wanted to belong. I wanted to be included. Mm-hmm. I was new in town, and it seems like this is a big deal to these people. So I started going to churches, and I really felt even more different in church. When I remember the first time I was sitting with a friend in a church, and I was listening to the preacher preach, and I was 9 years old, and I thought, this is bullshit. Like that, what he was saying... What you're saying about God is not what my experience has been, is not what my insides, it did not feel in alignment. And I didn't even know that word then, right? But today I can say it was not in alignment with me. It did not feel loving. It did not feel kind. It did not feel generous. And these were things that I felt that God was. Instinctually, no one taught me that. That's just what I felt like. And so I sort of church hopped a lot as a youth because I just could not kind of get on board, and I really didn't understand what they were saying. And most of the things they were saying were offensive to me in some way, or it felt hurtful to hear it. It felt scary. And so I just church hopped until probably in middle school, late middle school, early high school. I found a church that I enjoyed, but still there was always this feeling of that I didn't belong, because my mom was a single mom and divorced, and none of the, all the kids that I was in church with all their parents were still married. It didn't seem like there were problems in their home the same way that there were problems in our home with finances and other things like that. So I still felt just I loved being there, and I loved what I was hearing about God there, and I felt close to God there, but I didn't feel close to my peers. I still always felt a little bit disconnected from my peers. And so when I went to college, as a lot of college kids do anyway, church sort of fell to the wayside because I had more important things to be doing.
Of course. Socializing, right?
Yes.
There's one word for it.
Yeah, that's one word for it. That's a gentle word for it, Megan. And so I really, my spirituality sort of just, it really lost, or really my church, my connection with God, let's say that. My connection with God really just took a back seat, and I wasn't focusing on spirituality in any way until I took a class my senior year called Asian philosophy. And I had no clue what I was signing up for. It was an elective. I think it was considered like a science type elective, but because it's philosophy, it felt more, science and math are not my strong suits. And so I was like, well, I can handle philosophy. So I got in this class, and I didn't realize it was going to be all about spirituality. Buddhism, Hinduism, the history, meditation was taught. We did a lot of, and that class, I would say, was the biggest game changer for me, where I started to understand what I was learning in church from a whole new level. And what I really understood in that class was that most religions are more similar than they are different. And if you take away some of the details and you get to the core sort of philosophies, that it's more similar than it is different. And really, the thing that always that I wanted to understand when I was going to church was the Trinity. And I could never wrap my mind around how God is three beings in one, and that just always boggled my mind. And Asian philosophy taught me what that meant. It was like suddenly the Holy Spirit made sense to me. And part of that is because I had tried meditation, and I realized I am several beings in one, that I myself, I can see when I meditate that I'm not all of my thoughts. I'm not, there is a separation between me and my thoughts. And that sort of helped me learn about it. And then in Hinduism, and I couldn't tell you right now exactly what was the key for me. I'd have to reread some of the literature I was reading then, but there was just some things that clicked in for me. And it felt like finally, after, I don't even know how long I'd been, maybe I was 23 at the time, after 23 years of sort of feeling a certain way about God, but not understanding. And when I was taught about God, what I felt about him and what I was taught didn't always line up. But in this Asian philosophy course, it was like everything came together, and I realized I was right all along. Or that's how I took it. And so
what a great confirmation.
Yes. And it gave me freedom in my spirituality. It gave me allowance to broaden things out and to take what I like from different things. I stopped trying to conform, which I think I'd always done as a kid, try to fit in, try to make what I felt on the inside, try to reconcile that with what I was hearing from other people. And this Asian philosophy course just sort of like took all of that off of me. I didn't have to do any of that. I didn't have to struggle anymore with my faith, with what I believe. And I really was able to stand in my own power for myself about what that means to be a spiritual person, and how it gets to be my journey, and it gets to be what I want it to be. And I do think that I'm able to do that more easily than others, because I didn't grow up in a religious home. And so there wasn't a lifetime of dogma, and, I'd been exposed to it, but by my own choosing. I know my mom never forced me to do anything. There was never any of that. And so but that was my freedom point of just, okay, I can do whatever I want. And at that time, I did choose to reject the church in a pretty strong way, because I felt they were misteaching. And I felt that it was my mission to make sure that, for as many Bible beating Christians as there are in Oklahoma, that I was going to be the counter, the resistance to that. And that actually wasn't very much fun for me either, as it turns out.
I definitely want to hear that story.
So I decided, kind of like what you said in the beginning about, there are these extremes, and coming back to balance is really where you want to be. And that for me is, that's so where I am at this point in my life, is that extremes, I tend to go to them. I'm a black or white thinker. I'm sort of an all or nothing person. I think a lot of us can be. I think our ego likes that. But I have learned that neither of the extremes ever work for me. I still choose them sometimes because, I don't know, it just seems like a good idea at the time.
Sure.
But every time I choose them, I realize this is not working either. Where's the middle ground? And the middle ground is actually very hard for me to find. But I work really hard at it. And it's getting easier. The more I do it, the easier it gets. But that is not natural to me. And so, that's been a whole other journey of learning. And I've learned about myself that I learn in extremes. So I have to try one thing and decide, nope, that's not it. And then I'll try the exact opposite. And to realize, the opposite isn't it either. But I think usually I have to try the opposite on just to see,
I have to say that, this all resonates a lot with me in that we have a similar experience in terms of, I wasn't raised in a religious family either. My mom was always searching for a church. And so I was the person who willingly went with her because I thought it was interesting. And then I'd explore other churches with friends. And my grandmother was Catholic and frequently took me with her to Catholic services, to the point where I didn't know I had to be confirmed to do to do the sacrament, but she let me do it. So I didn't actually know I wasn't supposed to until later. I'm like, well, my grandma was kind of a rule breaker. I never knew that about her. But all of those things offered that well-rounded, in many ways, experiences, and recognizing the similarities between the different, and these weren't hugely different experiences, but there were a lot of similarities between the different churches and denominations that I found fascinating. And then went into philosophy, not as a major, but found a lot of different philosophical classes. I know I would have loved the one you took. I'm bummed that I didn't have that option where I went to school, because I think that would have helped accelerate my path, my awakening in a way that it seemed to have really inspired yours. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
It's just really cool. I was going to mention that extreme part. For me, what I've really noticed in my own life is kind of and I've said this in different contexts, but it's like a pendulum approach. I notice these patterns in society as well, where it's almost like we go to one extreme and then the pendulum has to go all the way to the other end, and then eventually it evens out into a center point. But I've noticed that in my own life as well, especially kind of more recently. The one that's really struck me is masculine and feminine energy. I came into my awakening from a high level of masculine energy, not as just because I was raised as the son my dad never had. I was a total tomboy. I climbed trees. I love climbing trees. I still would like to do that, except I don't think the trees would enjoy it as much. But I had a much more masculine approach in work, in my work style, and I was semi-assertive probably more than assertive in certain contexts. And then I went way on the other extreme into a high level of feminine energy, where I was just crying all the time. And it's when I realized the empath aspect of me that I had blocked for so long was totally flooding in at pretty inopportune times. When I'm up talking in a doctoral program to my colleagues about something, and then I start crying, they're like, oh, here she goes again. But, in time they got used to it. But, for me, it's like, come on, couldn't I just wait until after? But no, it was me really awakening the feminine side. And now, just like within the past couple of months, I've started to recognize finding that center and the both and piece. So even though I say I love and embrace a both and approach, it's also sometimes, especially, not my go-to either. It's, I think I learn in extremes too, and maybe most of us do. It's a really interesting concept. So I apologize for interrupting that flow, but I really wanted to.
Yeah, it is. And I used to say that thing about the pendulum too, not as in society, but I can see that when you say that. I'm like, yeah, that's true. But I would say I would like be riding the pendulum and I'd wave at the middle. Like I'd wave at balance as I went by, like, oh, there it is, bye, you know. And
for like an hour or a day or
yes. And then eventually I can come to that place and I can really like be in it and it feels good. But I think sometimes balance can be scary for people because it is not natural. I think it is not, you know, for some reason we don't sit well in that pocket, you know. And I think with music, like musicians and dancers, there's this sweet spot to life in a lot of artistic venues. And it's difficult to be there. I don't know all the reasons why, but I think that it's something that's harder to achieve. And it doesn't, you know, but once you're there, it's like, oh yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
But it can be hard to stay there too. And I'm a Libra, so balance is supposed to be sort of my jam. But I think I'm the Libra that's still really learning, you know, how to use that to my advantage. But I do love it. I mean, when I am there, it's like, yes, this is home. You know, this is my place.
Well, I'm a Gemini, and so I almost think I'm supposed to have 2 points of view at any given time, and frequently I do. And so blending those together is also a challenge for me. I think in part of that, it's finding that natural center between two things. But I also think it has to do with being able to hold two sometimes opposing views together.
Yes.
And that may be that sweet spot, that balance in between. And that's not easy.
No. And the world teaches you it should be either or. You know, we're not taught both and. We're taught either or. And that's why I struggle with politics so much, because you have to choose. And especially this election, I was reading, you know, I was trying to get educated. And it's like, well, I want both of these things. You know, I want both this law that we're passing. I want this part of this that this side is saying, and I want this from this side. But there's not a, you know, it's like, oh, I don't know, it's too mind-boggling. So it's just, and the Libra too with the scales, you know, they weigh both sides. And so I'm accused of being indecisive a lot, but it's not that I'm indecisive. It's that I don't find the option that fits me or that has that balance. That option isn't easily accessible in our world. Usually they're trying to force me into a box that I don't want to be in. And so places like the Lightworkers Lab, or, you know, when you find your tribe of people who accept that you're not going to fit in a box, you're going to be surprising, you're going to say this or that, you know, you're going to embrace both sides. That's hard to find too. And so what a gift to, along the way, you know, when I stumbled across the Lightworkers Lab, it was like, oh my gosh, I can be me fully and not be afraid of backlash, especially because Crystal has crafted such a safe space. Even if someone had an opinion about me, they're not allowed to say it in a shameful, hateful way. And so I have the freedom to be be all of who I am in the lab. And I don't know that I do that really well anywhere else in life. And I'm so grateful to the lab for that, because I think the more we practice it here in the lab, the more it will spill out into the world. And, you know, I think we are changing. I think this little space has the capacity to be, it is a game-changing space, not just for us, but it'll have a ripple effect. And that excites me too, that, you know, we are bringing that. You can have you can feel multiple ways and it's okay.
Yes. Yeah. I love that too. And I think you raise a really a great point about this space. I mean, I don't know whether Crystal set up this. I know she was very conscientious about what she wanted, very intentional about what kind of space she wanted to create. And maybe there was a side goal of it expanding beyond our being able to take this out beyond this space. She probably thought that in some way, shape, or form, but I do see it really taking root in our learning how to be accepting of others in this space helps us to do that elsewhere and model it for other people to see that there is this other way. Yeah. And I'm very grateful for that as well. I have to say, and you know, I don't want to go into politics, but there is a show my husband and I just started watching and binge watching. I mean, we are not really binge watchers. I mean, we're more, we'll maybe watch one a night of something or another that we like, and we stream most of our things. But this one, we caught it at just the right time. And I swear we watched like 6 episodes at once, and we're like, what? We stayed up until 2 a.m, which we never do, except for this. And it's called Designated Survivor. Or no, yeah, that's it, with Kiefer Sutherland. And and it's really interesting when you look at, I mean, it's got a lot of hidden conspiracy types of things, which we like, and that's fun. But he comes to the table, Kiefer Sutherland. I don't want to give too much away, but he's like the guy who survives a terrorist attack, basically, and ends up being president. And as president, we learned that he's an independent. So he doesn't represent one side or the other. And I'm looking at it from that perspective, which I think is really fascinating. So I'll just add the link in the show notes, but it's a Netflix thing.
Oh, cool.
And,
yeah.
I mean, we were just like, wow, this is so cool. Just the fact that there is that alternative to look at as a way to bridge those extremes is a nice message to see.
Yeah. And I do think that that pendulum is swinging back, back towards middle. I think that we are on the leading edge of that we're really, I feel like
the wave riders.
Yeah. I feel like it's coming. I do feel like that balance is on the way, and that we just, we're helping to usher it in. And I mean, how awesome is that? When I live my daily life, I don't think that like, oh, I'm ushering in this new age, like I'm just Nicole and I just am clumsy and goofy and weird. And, but when I do things like this, I think about, oh my gosh, we really are this group. And like you said, I don't know what Crystal's intention was from the beginning. I know I've heard her share that she needed a community. She was out in the middle of nowhere and she needed some people. And so who knows if she saw it going this way or not, but the fact that it is, when two or more gather, I still love things from the Bible still impacts me. And so I love that where two or more are gathered, there is power. There is, that God shows up. When we show up, when we say, we want this, when we ask, and then we gather together, and then it just multiplies and it grows and it gets bigger. And the fact that we can be that for the world as light workers, that's really what we're about. We're about bringing in, the light and the peace and the love to every situation, and balance is a part of that. So
yes, definitely. Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot lately about why, so I come with the belief that I chose to be here at this time, in existence, human existence. And I wonder why, it's like, why would I choose this? There are so many other times that I think might have been fun, and maybe I was there for those too. Right. In fact, I probably was, but it's become really, really clear to me, just like you had said, that this is, that I chose this time because it's a great time of change and transformation in many different ways. And that's what that's a big part of my area of interest professionally, is change and transition. And I never realized when I was interested in those things that it also had to do with a societal level. I was looking more at companies and people, individuals and stuff. And now it's like, well, of course it makes sense that I would choose this time and place, because that's what it's all about right now. And yeah. I have to say that really helped me when I have that perspective during times when I get frustrated or annoyed and irritated with things that are going on in the world. So it's like, remember, I'm here for a reason, and I chose this time, and it's the time that I wanted to be here. So yeah.
I can really relate to that. I mean, there are lots of times because I hold that belief too, that I really chose, that I decided to come here. And sometimes I'll look at my family and I'm like, why did I choose you people?
Oh my gosh, totally.
I look at again the time period of like, why didn't I choose something, or why did I choose this or that? And then when I can zoom out and I can see the bigger picture, I always think, oh yeah, that's why. And hindsight is 2022. Like you, every profession I've ever chosen was about people, and my name actually means victory of the people, and I love that. And my mom, she says, she had other names picked out. Nicole was not on the radar. But when I came out and she was looking at me, Nicole popped into her mind. My mom is very intuitive. She doesn't call it that, but she's super intuitive. I think she's a witch, but she doesn't say so. So I don't know. But she just knew that was my name. And, for a long time, I was like, God, that's a big name. Like, what? I don't know how to be the victory of the people. But I can look back and say I've always been trying. And even with, you and I talked about this a little before, I started in college, I wanted to be an actor. I have a theater degree, and the reason I wanted to be an actor was because when I would sit in an audience, whether it was film or TV or theater, I would feel something. I would have a catharsis, and that catharsis, I wanted to give that to other people because it was so needed for me. That used to be my safe space to feel, right? As an empath, especially in a family like mine. My family is very strong-willed people and very loud and boisterous, and they can be aggressive. And I'm not. I'm like this soft little mild person, but in a family full of, I say like I'm the opposite. I was the sheep wearing wolves clothing. So I was born a sheep. I was born really fluffy and really soft and really sensitive. And my family are wolves, and they're beautiful, but if you're a sheep, they can be scary. And so I had to learn how to be a wolf for a long time until it no longer worked for me. And I shed that suit because I realized, no, I'm not a wolf. I'm good at pretending to be one when necessary, but I'm really a sheep. And so kind of like you with the masculine and the feminine, you know, I started out, I learned that I needed to be stronger to survive. And so I became that, but I did it to an extreme way. And so for me, theater and movies and TV, it was a safe way to feel the fullness of my feelings. It was a safe place to cry, because it's not safe to cry in my family of origin. You are seen as weak, and you should be, you know, stopping that right now. And so I learned how to feel my feelings in theater, and I wanted to give that to other people. I wanted to give that to others. And of course, that's not where I ended up, but I'm still doing that today. Every profession I've chosen has been one where I'm creating a safe space for people to be their true, authentic self. And that's what my mission is on this planet. And when I remember that, you know, I feel really alive, and I feel really glad that I picked this time and this space and this now and this body, you know, but most of the time I don't remember that. So
yeah, it's almost like, you know, you have to get into that mental space to be able to remember it. For me, at least, it's like, it's still, I have things taped up in my office now to try to remind me, but I still have to look at them. So every now and again, I take a pause, and it's not a directive pause, you know, where at 10 o'clock every day I look at my wall. It's more like I'm writing, and I'm like, oh, nothing's coming out the way I want it to. And then I take a breather, and I look at the wall, and I'm like, oh yeah, you know, I'm here to help. We have similar missions in our, I want to help people to ignite that spark within them that's been dormant for so long as a result of social conditioning and other conditioning, that they just felt like, you know, they're living a life of shoulds. And with the bigger secondary goal of raising the vibration of the planet, you know, no small thing for me. But I love the imagery of being a sheep in wolves, you know, being a wolf wearing sheep's clothing, because you were in a family of wolves, and it seemed, is that how you said it? Because it is sheep wearing wolves clothing.
A sheep wearing wolves clothing.
Yes. Because that's how I felt too, except that I could not stifle those tears for the life of me. I could not do it. And I felt ashamed because of it, because it was considered weak. And it's helped me to realize, wow, I'm a really strong empath, because, you know, I had these emotions. I don't believe they were all mine, but I'm always the person exhibiting them for other people, you know, I mean, and that's how I learned that I was an empath. I'm at this, you know, my husband's twin brother died, but I didn't know him very well. And I went over to England, which is where he's from, and stayed with his family, and they're all stoic. You know, his mom cried, but kind of in private, and nobody else really did, except for me, the American that they've only met twice, you know, all the time. And I'm like, why am I crying so hard? I mean, this is tragic, and I feel sad, but I didn't even really know him. And it lasted for a long time after that. And it was right around that time when somebody's like, well, maybe you're an emotional sponge. And I'm like, ding, you know, and that it was like that wording seemed to matter to me, because I'm like, that's how I felt. And I'm like, oh, well, that helps, because I couldn't understand it. I thought I was losing my mind. You know, I'm just like, why am I crying all the time? And, but that whole, it's like remembering when I was a little kid and my dad was telling me to toughen up and not be so sensitive and all of those other things, which I know a lot of people have had those experiences, where I'm just like trying so hard not to cry, to the point where it's like, you know, no, you're crying. You know, you have to feel this emotion. You cannot block it anymore.
Yeah, I think that is something that your body is meant to cry. You know, it's a purifying, it's a cleansing, you're meant to release those things. It's one of the ways that your body helps you to process emotion. And for those of us who have had to even try to stuff that's hard on the body. It's hard on the, you know, it's not natural. not good for you. It's like if it's just not good for you. And so, but I was successful. It was so embarrassing and shameful to me. And when I was really little, I couldn't stop crying no matter how many times he said, suck it up, or, no matter how many times I was told. It was like, eventually I just kind of had to go off on my own and cry. But as I got older, somehow I was able to sort of compartmentalize myself. And there were seasons where I did not cry ever. When it was an emotional, the only time I cried was when, like I said, when something that was not associated with me, if I was watching TV and something was happening to someone else, or, I would cry at happy things, but I would never cry in the height of drama or emotion. And I had a boyfriend one time in college say, like, he cried all the time. And he was like, why? You're never upset. You don't care. I care. You don't care. And I'm like, no, you're just a sissy. So I saw myself model, the behavior that was modeled to me, I started modeling it to others. And I thought, is that really what I believe? Do I really believe that him crying makes him a sissy? No. And then I started thinking, like, well, why don't I cry more? I mean, that's a valid question. Like, why am I not crying? And it took years from that point. I mean, I was interested in it when we had that conversation, and it brought it to my awareness of, oh yeah, I don't cry anymore. When did that stop? And then, it took several years for me to unravel what had happened and how it had happened, and how I got to where I was then. But and I think that's just one of those things too, that's part of a journey, is that it takes a long time sometimes, this process. I work with a lot of clients who want immediate results, and I'm like, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. Yep. We're going to have to spend some time together, and no matter what area, massage therapy, it's not a one-time fixes everything, because I tend to attract people who are in real pain. I just tend to attract clients, no matter what kind of clients they are, who are really struggling. And so, sorry, I'm about to knock my phone off. I think part of my journey too is to teach people about the process, that it is a process. It takes time. It's okay that it takes time, and to learn how to ride that out without stressing yourself out even more. Because I think we have a lot of expectations on ourselves about how we should heal, when we should heal, that it should have been yesterday, and it's just not like that.
Yep. It's so foreign for some people to really understand that, because again, with the conditioning, we've been so conditioned to expect immediacy with everything. And then there's really limited patience for those things that take time. Yeah. Certainly working in companies, they're like, we want it done yesterday. And it's like, well, you know what? That's not how it works. It just isn't. And some people do not enjoy hearing that. But it's like, well, you're working with people here, and people do not conform to your image of a box, whatever you want to put them in a box, you expect them to sit there and be okay with it. And that's just not the way it is. And so all of these other behaviors come out as a result, and you don't like them. And, it's like, and that takes time, because those things, however long they've worked here and any place they've worked before, and anything they've ever learned about work is all feeding into those behaviors they're seeing that you don't like, Yep. But I was going to say, okay, so you reminded me of a movie, The Holiday. Are you familiar with it?
Yes, I love The Holiday, and I can relate.
Oh, yeah, I love that movie too. And Cameron Diaz plays a part where she has a hard time crying, and it's actually a significant part of her journey within that movie, because it's actually her body telling her when things are good as well. But I had also compartmentalized for a good part of my life, the middle years. I don't want to call it, I'm still in those years, let's say, but the early middle years where I was in the Navy. You don't go crying in the Navy. You cannot cry at boot camp. It's like a bad idea. It's not received well. And that's where I learned how to compartmentalize, I think, at some point. But it's also a gauge for me when I no longer can laugh, and when I no longer can cry, when I don't feel those types of emotions, those are red flags for me, because it's like, okay, I'm totally closing myself off to stuff and what's going on here. And I don't think I used to realize it as quickly as I do now. It took years for me to recognize, wow, I've really lost my joy, and I would never have called it that then. It's like, wow, I'm laughing at a movie that I used to laugh at, and now I don't think it's funny anymore. But I do, but I don't, Or I can watch this horror movie where people are getting, killed left and right as a part of the movie, and it's not disturbing me. What does that mean, Whereas it's actually, that's a new gauge for that whole evolution to the middle, because for a long time I couldn't watch any movies where there were anything having to do with women and children in any capacity, like any, you know, and I'm still sensitive to that, but I found that I view those things in a different capacity than I used to. It's a part of that blending together. I still don't, those extremes I still have, I just choose not to watch things with that level of extreme, but every now and again something pops in and I'm like, wow, I'm watching this and the content bothers me, you know, in terms of the theme, but I'm not crying. And I can watch this and recognize it for what it is, instead of expanding it to my life or everybody's life in the world.
Yeah.
You know, which to me is a win. So anyway.
Yes. Yeah. That's a really big meter for me too. And I have a lot of those, like, now that I've come so far on because also my spiritual journey sort of became along the way a personal development journey. There were some things that I really needed to work on because I was very unhappy. And so I really started seeking out, rather than seeking out, you know, spirituality, I sought therapy, and I sought, you know, I was reading a lot of self-help books. I sought mental health recovery. And so, you know, a lot of that influences what I do too. But now today I have those things built in for myself as well. And that's one of mine too, is that when I'm not crying freely or I'm not laughing freely, something's wrong, and I need to stop and take a look at what's going on, what's has me clogged up. I do feel that way, like it's like a clog, you know, and I need to get some Drano out and unclog my my stuff. But
emotional Drano.
Yes, emotional Drano. So I relate to that, and I think it's really good that we, you know, as we journey along, we find those places of like, okay, this is my normal, this is my sense of well-being, and when this isn't going on, I can know now that, oh, you know, something's a little off here. And I love those signals, because before, like you said, I just went through life not paying attention really to those things that I didn't even know they were happening. And today I know how to take a look at myself and say, okay, yeah, you're not crying, you're not laughing. And I didn't even know my laughter was shut down. I think that's one of the things that I was taught in therapy, is when you shut down one emotion, you really don't get to pick and choose what you're shutting down with it. You kind of just shut a bunch down. So I didn't know my laughter was also shut down until I was with a mentor one time. We went to see a movie, and in the previews there was a movie on a preview about, you know, like one of the Disney wilderness movies where it's a documentary, like they're really filming out in the wild, but you know, there's like narration on top of it, and there were these monkeys. Sure. and they were doing something cute and delightful and funny, but you know, I just was witnessing it as like, oh yeah, cute monkey. And the mentor sitting next to me laughed so hard it embarrassed me, like, because the whole theater was quiet and she was like at this monkey, and I was like, oh my god, like, that is, why is she laughing so hard at this monkey? And it kind of freaked me out, and I was, you know, like, oh, I'm not with her. But then later, you know, we worked together for like 2 years, and later we're in a movie theater, I'm with different friends, and the theater is quiet, and there was a moment where I'm the only one, something happens, and I am laughing, and I'm the embarrassing one now. But for me, it was like a moment of achievement, like, oh my God, my laughter's back. I can laugh and be the only one who finds that amusing, and I can belly laugh, and I wasn't ashamed of it. But, you know, and it was like, oh, I've become her, yay! But now when I find myself, like, if no one else thinks it's funny and I'm like, oh, it's not that funny, I know that's a red flag today. I know that, oh, because when it is funny and it's funny to you and you don't have abandon, the laughter comes out before you know it's happening. I know that I'm restricting when I don't have that kind of abandon, tears or laughter or even anger. When I don't feel with abandon, I know something's not quite right with me.
I am so glad you worded it that way, feeling with abandon. That is such a good point. I think, and also bringing up the anger part, you know, that's the part that I've always been taught to stifle. And I've been told I'm an angry person. And I'm like, I'm really not. You know, I don't feel like I am. I get frustrated sometimes, especially with technology these days. But at the same point, I'm usually the one who finds everything funny, to the point where some people are annoyed by that, because how can I laugh? I don't laugh at really negative, bad things, but I do laugh at absurd things. And some people take that so seriously that they get very offended by my finding it absurd and funny. And that whole, regulating that, I learned to do that in many different contexts. So in family environments, but then also I took it to the workplace, to the point where I just decided work could not be fun. It wasn't allowed to enjoy your work. Nobody wants you to have that much fun. I got yelled at, well, spoken to in my work. In my head, it was being yelled at, but they were probably really reasonable and never raising their voices. It was just the tone and the words. But the people I worked with didn't like that I found so much joy in my job as a nursing assistant. I worked with people where that was their life's work, and I was in my early 20s and was going to be moving out of town to go to college. So, they kind of knew I had a different perspective on life anyway, but I really loved the people I worked with. As far as this was a group of people with a high level of Alzheimer's and dementia, and they had to be in a locked facility because they would wander and they were hazards to themselves and potentially to others. So some had lashed out, but I loved making connections with those people. And it really, really, really annoyed the people I worked with in a big way. And so as years went on, and I'd gotten out of that wasn't really my profession. That was more like a job to me. But when I entered my profession in human resources, I started to really get backlash when I'd show my true self. And so like you had said about feeling able to be yourself in the Lightworkers Lab, that's such a refreshing feeling, but also looking back and seeing how much I really tempered pretty much every aspect of who I was, except for this much, was like a big epiphany. And also, a way for, then I started to get mad about it because I'm like, I spent, years doing this and never really realized. And now I'm glad to have that level of awareness. But at the same point, it's like, and I like to not look in, I don't like to look in the past as regret. I don't want to feel like I've wasted time. That's a phrase I cannot stand. But at the same point, it's like, I would have really probably appreciated those jobs so much more because there were aspects that were wonderful. But perhaps I'd even have stayed in that profession if I found a way to bring my whole self to work in an environment that embraced that. And it's sad that couldn't happen at that time.
Yeah, it is sad. And I think, there's on the other side of the coin too, there are times when we do need to temper our speech or our, we need to have, but there is a way to feel my feelings and not project those onto others. There's a way to feel my feelings and also do it in a way that's respectful to a group of people I might be in at that time. Right. And so I always have to look at my motive. But when like you said, like when I've stopped really feeling, and I can relate to the Alzheimer's too with, my grandfather had dementia before he passed. And some of the things he said, I thought were hysterical. I mean, he was not himself, and that was painful to watch him become someone else. But the new version of him was delightful sometimes too. And he was saying some not so great things sometimes, but I found them hysterical because I knew it wasn't coming from him. And my family did not appreciate that. I will say, especially my grandmother who had to live with him and was his primary caretaker. She did not find it funny at all. But I often think, like, what if she could have? What if she could have found a little humor in it? Her journey would have been easier. I think and so I think it's a gift to be able to relate with someone where they are instead of where you want them to be. And unfortunately, we just do that to each other so much. We have these expectations. We want people to behave a certain way, and when they don't, we don't like it. But yeah, it's one of those things. I just feel like as long as I know that I'm making a choice to temper my emotions rather than tempering my emotions because I don't feel safe if I don't, or I don't feel like I'm accepted, it's kind of like there's this really fine line between, am I feeling the fullness of my feelings and honoring myself, but I'm also choosing with this group of people, that joke might not be, maybe I shouldn't tell that joke.
Right.
Or say that thing, but also knowing that I still don't have to pretend that I don't think that joke is funny. So there's this like really fine line of how to find balance there too. And that's one thing that I often struggle with. I used to get like these shame attacks when I would say something and it wouldn't get a reaction that I was hoping for or that felt good to me. And I would go home and I would obsess about it. Like, why did I say that thing? Why did I have that? Why did I show that emotion? Why did I do this? Why did I do that? And this right here, having a interview or a discussion that's public, I would have never done this. I would have never, ever considered doing this before because I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth sometimes. And that's part of being an intuitive person, is that sometimes I don't know I'm going to say, because spirit will come in here and say stuff. There's a few things in here that, I'm writing a book that I will come back and I already know when I heard myself say it, oh, that goes in my book. But I didn't know that was going to happen. Like sometimes I just say things and I don't know that I'm saying them until they've already been said. And then I'm like, oh, that was really good. But then there are other times I say stuff in the person's face across from me. I'm like, oh gosh, I shouldn't have said that. And I would come home and feel like, oh gosh, I really messed that up. And today I don't have to do that to myself. I can say, no, if they don't like it, that's their problem, not mine. I get to be true to me. So yeah.
That's a huge advancement at least it is for me. And so I'm assuming that feels great to you to get to the point where the fear of judgment and being in really high judged areas in terms of profession in the past, it's like it had gotten me to the point where I don't want to talk at all. And I just stopped wanting to go and meet new people, which is, I love meeting new people. That's why I'm doing this show. Because I want to get to know people in the lab better. And this is my way of doing that. And there's other reasons for doing this show, but that's one of the ones that I find the most joy in. But it in the past, it had been like, oh no, because, I don't know them. And it's so easy for me to connect with them at certain levels that then sometimes I forget that that's not across the board, and sometimes I stretch the limits, it's like, well, where is the boundary here? And without really knowing I'm doing it, it's just kind of that's just what I do. Sometimes it's like, oh, let's see, let's see if they'll disagree with me. Sometimes I want that just to see if how much into groupthink are we here? And, I saw that Julie, my friend Julie's here, and she can attest. She has seen me in that mode, I think. But there was, it's just that adapting to different circumstances, I think, is a really great strength to have, but also recognizing that it doesn't really matter is another one. It's like, well, if I want to adapt, it's important, great, but still that fear of judgment can be really paralyzing, and recognizing that it's all in our heads anyway. Other people can be offended, but the way we absorb their experience is really our own devising, It's like we're like, I'm assuming you're offended, so therefore you are. They may never say it. They may not even think it.
Yeah. I make up stories about what other people are doing all the time. And it's maddening sometimes. Like, okay, stop, get back into your body. What are you doing right now? And I do think that I do have a really natural way of being a chameleon with people. Yeah. And like you said, it has sort of like, that's a lovely asset that I have, but it can become almost a character defect or like a hindrance to me when I do it based on why I'm doing it. Like I said, it's about my motive. So if I'm doing it because I want to be behaving a certain way with this crowd of people because I feel good doing that. I feel good, be meeting with them where they are, which I think is also a skill of mine. I can, when I work with my clients, I meet them where they are. I don't try to make them come to my level because it has never worked. It's never been effective for me in healing. I have tried it. I will say I've tried it. I know it's not effective, so I've kind of stopped. But, I try not to push them, their body, they're changing their life at a pace that is too uncomfortable for them. I'm going to stretch someone, I'm going to do trigger point therapy. I'm going to get in there and you might hurt for a few seconds that's going to make you feel better, but not beyond what you can handle. And that's a fine line. But then, when I'm being a chameleon because I think that's what's expected of me and I'll only be liked if I do it that way. And I can't live in the world without being who you want me to be. Then I've crossed into that negative place where I've stopped being true to myself at all. So it's, it's a gift and a curse depending on how I use it. And that's half the battle of living a balanced life too, is knowing like, when am I going too far? When is this stopped being a gift and become sort of this thing that's holding me back? And it's about discernment. I think that's one of my favorite words right now in life. I love that discernment. Word too. Yeah.
Do you find that your default is the chameleon and that you have to recognize that you're doing it instead of being intentional about, yes, I'm going to be a chameleon in this group?
Yes. My default is safety. And I think that's a lot of, for a lot of us, we have a survival instinct that is, we don't override it very well because it's so, it's instinct. I mean, it's so instinctual on a biological level, on a scientific level. So but also growing up the way that I grew up, safety is something I'm always seeking for and looking for. And that my insides are, it's like, I've got to, how can I be safe in this situation? And being a chameleon was the easiest way for me to stay safe in my family of origin. You know, that's why I put on the wolf costume in the first place, because wolves will eat a sheep. So you have to, you know, I had to become what they were for, in my mind, to stay safe. And all of this was unconscious. And today I can look back and I can see what happened. But at the time, it's just, I didn't know that's what was going on. And so, yeah, I think the chameleon part of me was developed and became so natural because I seek safety. And that is one of my go-to tools to stay safe. And I'll do it without even realizing. There are times a lot of times I'll say something to someone that I don't mean because I think that's what they want me to say. And I'll catch myself and I'll have to say, I'm sorry, that's not, actually, I don't believe that. Or actually, that's not how I really feel. I said that and but I don't really mean it. It came out, you know, sometimes things just come out of my mouth to keep me safe. And then when I hear it, I'm like, oh no, wait, I need to revise that. I ask for a lot of redos in my relationships all the time. Like, can I redo that conversation? That's not really what I meant to say. And I used to not think I could do that because I thought it would make me look dumb, or, you know, like I was afraid of judgment about the redo. And so I never gave, you know, I just kind of stuck with my guns all the time. That did not work for me. So today I just say, you know, I need a redo about that. That's not what I meant to say. That, or how it came out, the intention didn't quite, you know, like what I was feeling and what I said didn't actually match up. Let me try that again. So I see them today as bloopers, you know, like, yeah, I just get to have you know, that was not my best take. I get to do another one. So.
I absolutely love that. I have that same thing around the chameleon effect. And at some point I recognized that I was doing it. I was a part of just a small group of people who wanted to move forward with some type of project or something or another. And it's really helped me in my work because I recognize the energy of groupthink. Because as a chameleon, it's really easy to go there. And so everyone's like, yeah, let's do this and blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, I'm like, okay, fine. And I volunteered for something too. I went home and I'm like, I absolutely don't want to do that, you know? And, and then I've backed out as a result. And so people are like, well, she's not very reliable. She, you know, committed to this thing and now she's not doing it. Or, you know, I'm assuming they're thinking that again. That's my own story about it. And I'm like, wait a minute, you know, I now know that that I have a potential to get involved into that energy. There's inspiration, there's, you know, a high level of positivity, and I love that energy. So of course I'm going to join on in. But I have to be really cautious about making decisions in that space. And so now I'm like, give me a day to think it over. And some people don't like that, and I don't really care because I'm like, I'm not going to go and jump into things knowing how easy it is for me to be a joiner in that way and then regretting it later. And that has worked so well for me to have that boundary. And sometimes I forget about it, but most of the time I'm like, when I feel myself getting caught up into that, it's like, you know, there's like a, you know, warning, Will Rogers, you know, you're about to commit. It's like, okay. And the thing about the saying what comes, you know, saying whatever comes to mind and then asking for a redo, I just love that. In Thanksgiving, we had, it was a group of people. I know that our next door neighbors pretty well, but then they had their some of their family along that I don't know as well, and another neighbor who I don't know as well. And I was talking with her about something, and she's a pretty opinionated person. And so I noticed myself working to relate with her, and I like to understand other people's perspectives. So sometimes I'll invite them by not saying my own, right? Into that conversation. And she definitely took the bait. It wasn't really bait. I wasn't sitting there going, oh, let's see how far I can get her to go. It was more like, I really just want to understand where she's coming from. But she said things. And so one of the things I noticed was I was nodding, which I'm sure she probably thought was agreement. For me, it's more like, I understand what you're saying, you know? And then I started kind of walking the fringe of, how I noticed I was about to do the chameleon thing, you know, and maybe say some things that really weren't how I truly felt. And my husband was on the other side of her just watching me, which it kind of was a good thing. Because I think he's going, is she going to say stuff she doesn't really mean? Which he would probably just jump in and say, you don't mean that. You don't think that way. But I'm looking and I'm like, how do I say this in a way that will represent how I feel without saying I completely disagree with you.
Right.
And so it happened in the moment, but that's kind of rare for me because, I'm like, wait a minute, speak your truth, right? Don't go, just because she believes that doesn't mean you have to go and, embrace that belief, because I didn't. And but at the same point, I think that she spoke in that definitive way because she's an either or, still embraces that either or way. And I don't actually believe, after talking with her more, that she's really an either or person. She just didn't really know how to be a both and. She didn't know how to get it more to the center. But after talking with her, I realized she's really not as biased in certain ways as it sounded initially. So it offered a great way to really understand her better too.
Yeah. And I think that's beautiful because, like I said before, in my journey, I went from, sort of trying to fit in the church to becoming sort of radical about, churches. I thought things like church is the devil, like church is, they're hurting people. They are, I had all this ideas about how bad church was and how much they were wounding people. And I had this very aggressive, if it has anything to do with church, I'm not doing any of it. I'm anti-church. And, that didn't work for me either because I was doing the same thing that I was rejecting. I was being the bias that I rejected. I was being the judger. One of the things I was offended about at church was that you could receive so much judgment in a place where you should not, where we're talking about a God who doesn't judge us that way, right? Like, so it was so confusing to me. But then I became, well, Christians are shitty people and they're judgy. And, I was being what I didn't like. And the only way to get out of that cycle is to be the one who says it's okay to be different. We can have difference of opinions. I can be me, you can be you. We don't have to, we don't have to get along, but even we could. Could we get along? Could we find common ground between me on this end and you on that end of this issue? Yes, because there's 100 million issues that we all digest every day. There's going to be some common ground. So yeah, I can love anybody if I can look at them from a perspective that isn't, judging that they're different from me. And it's still hard. I mean, I don't do any of these things I talk about perfectly, but I strive towards them, right? I just strive towards them. But I think that's so wonderful that you were able to, get more information out of her and see her for who she truly is and not just what she maybe said that one time,
Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking about a full circle and how extremes kind of, there's a lot more closeness than is recognized. You can look at the big part that's different, but there are some things that are closer together, and really finding those things can be helpful. Not everybody wants to hear those things because sometimes people like to be in the extremes, I think. But at the same point, I was, I'm glad you went back to that, the word radical, and how that, that you went in your own extreme way. And then you started recognizing, wow, that, this is kind of the same thing I have a problem with on that side, and working your way more towards that center point. But I was curious about how else did that radical part of you, what did you do in that? You were part of a church community at the time, if I understand correctly, and then at some point you're just like, forget it, or what? How did that show up?
Yeah, so it started as, like I said, I went to college and church just became a non-priority. So
that's right.
At first it was sort of like, it wasn't a deliberate like, okay, this is what church has meant to me, and now I'm against it for these reasons. There was no event. It was sort of like a, it wasn't happening. But then as I was not plugged into the church, and as I was doing my own thing in college and getting new ideas and meeting new people, what I started to see was there are a lot of people who are calling themselves Christian who I didn't feel that were acting what I see as Christian, or what I see, if we just take Jesus on his own, not part of a religious, society, or, as if we just take his life and what he was doing and we just look at Jesus, I did not see people who were calling themselves Christians, it didn't look like that to me. It didn't, it looked sort of the opposite. And so then I became just disenchanted. It was more of an internal radicalism where I was angry with the church. But I wasn't shy about telling people either. If somebody was trying to convert me in any way, I was not shy to be aggressive about what I thought about them and what I thought about that method and what I thought about the fear, that they were. And so I would just speak in a way that was, and I would antagonize people. And, I would have heated arguments with all kinds of people. But it was never like, I didn't ever, go march or do, it was not like radical, maybe a dramatic. On the inside, it felt very radical. And I was I never thought Jesus was not for me. I just thought that Christians weren't. And that I did not want to, I deliberately did not become friends with people who called themselves Christians. I separated myself from people who were going to church. I would say often, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And I still say that, I still use that today in certain situations, but what the motive behind what I was saying back then was much different than how I use it today. So anything can be neutral until we add, something to it. And how I meant it then was basically, if you're involved in church, you're not my people, you're my anti-people, and get away from me. And I used it as, I had a barrier up with people. And it's actually been the last 2 or 3 years I've gone back to church. And that's another whole story. But now that I go back to church, and I will say it's churches. There are churches that I can sit in and still have that feeling of, this is bull. This is not, I don't think you're getting it right, sir. I think you're taking, I don't like what you're saying. I still can have that feeling in some church situations, but there are churches who are getting it right. And I was just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I was just saying all churches are bad, and I don't want to have anything to do with them because of these reasons. And I just couldn't see people as people, or, I couldn't see that people were just trying to do what they thought was right. And, I couldn't just let them, and I also couldn't let people have their own journey. I needed to try to shake them out of what they, those beliefs that I thought were limiting them and that I thought were shaming others and that were ultimately shaming themselves. Right. I wanted to break that off of them so bad, but instead of just being me and being an example, leading by example, saying things when I can in a gentle way, I was confrontational, I was rude, and nobody's going to hear, did I change a single person's mind with that attitude? No, I didn't. I made myself feel better because I felt superior in some way. And, for a while that was working for me, but at the end of the day, was it making my relationships good? No, it was just either you're in or you're out. And that's exactly what I didn't like about the church in the first place. So it was just sort of like, oh, shoot, I was doing that thing I didn't like, and that didn't feel good.
Well, and that allowed you a redo as well, really.
Yeah.
You recognized it, and that awareness is really awesome. And I keep thinking about the word radical, and as you were talking, I was wondering if having that formed in your mind was a way to really help you detach from that system, and that you almost have to go through the extreme in order to find what's right for you.
Yes. And that's what I say about the learning. I have to start with, I go from one end of the spectrum to the other to learn, oh yeah, it's neither of those things. It's somewhere in the middle. And then I can find that place of like, okay, what do I really think? How do I really want to handle this? But yes, I do think it's a really good, I think it is a good tool to go to the other side and see what that's about for a while, because it is a way to break free from the thing you're in. And I see myself do it all the time. Every time I learn a new skill, I start with what's going wrong right now? What is not serving me? And then my mind says, oh, okay, so just do there's this thing over here. It's at the very, go there for a while. And that's what I do. And then I come back to balance. And sometimes I don't have to go to the extreme, but most of the time I do. I just feel like I have grace for myself today that that's how I learn. And I don't stay in the other extreme very long anymore. Like, the religion thing, it was like, I was trying to be religious for, I don't know, let's see, maybe 7, 8, 9 years. And then I was trying to not be anything there was no religion for longer than that. And today I don't spend years in the extremes. I spend maybe months, days, a year,
Sure.
but it's not like, I usually realize, oh, I'm doing that thing again where, I'm trying out the other side of it. And now I have to come back to, where's my middle ground? And really, where's the middle is the question that's when the process really begins for me. Because as long as I'm seeking the middle, I may not have found it yet, but that's when I know I'm no longer sitting securely in the extremes. When I start to seek the middle, maybe I haven't found it, and maybe that process takes a few years, but I'm no longer comfortable with, okay, this is the way. And today I'm no longer comfortable with this is the way anymore at all. Like, I just don't think I know that much. I just don't.
Oh, I'm just taking a lot of notes. This is awesome. I'm thinking about, well, when you were talking, so I've been playing with the idea of learning in general and the process of learning, and that many of us have been taught that it's a linear upward thing. And it's always been an average, but in time when people were talking about that average, they dropped the extremes, right? So all you see is this line, and then you're either getting it or you're not. And that's like a success or failure thing. And then it feels good or bad, right? And we beat up on ourselves because if we feel like we're falling below that line, something's wrong. And what you were talking about and looking at those extremes, to me, represents a big part of the learning process, just like you had said. And it's like, okay, so we have high momentum, we're getting something, everything's making sense. And then all of a sudden, this is in a different context, but all of a sudden we do not know what we're doing. I feel like I absolutely don't have a clue, like I'm failing, and then, but it's a part of the learning process. It's almost as we're synthesizing this stuff and we're comparing and we're looking at what works for us and what doesn't. We see this in this psychic development circle where there's people who are like, I don't feel I'm getting it because I'm not getting any hits. And, what's wrong with me? And nobody really words it quite like that, but, you can kind of get that.
That undertone, yeah.
Yeah. And it's all a part of the process because we're seeing what works for us and what doesn't work for us and what's my method and what's right for me, and recognizing that it doesn't have to be the same as everybody else's, which is a huge learning. And then it goes back up again, but it's a tighter part of it's not such an extreme thing. So the next time around, it's like I'm getting something, I'm feeling good. And yeah, there's a little dark point, but I get through it faster. And then eventually you get to the center point where it's not like everything, but you've got a sense of, I like to use the word mastery because I haven't found something better. But I think as mastery, we're still always learning. It's like, it doesn't mean that I'm there, I'm at the top of the mountain and there's nowhere else to go. It's that I understand the nuances of this thing that I'm learning and how it applies to me. And now I can branch out and use it in different ways and experiment more with it and feel comfortable with it and recognize if I'm not getting something, it's okay. It's all a part of the process. So I've just, that spiral thing just keeps coming back to me as a nice, in my view, alternative to the linear approach. Because it's like,
me too.
I do not feel like my life has been like this at all.
Me either.
In fact, I'm in one of those lull points, and it's a significant lull, and so it must be a life lesson for me, because I feel, and which is also good because I feel like then there's a lot more of life because it's not one of those little circles. This is a big one for me, and it's been so long since I've felt like this and had these experiences that I'm like, okay, and I have wonderful friends, especially in the Lightworkers Lab and beyond, who are all like, this is all okay. You're good. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I don't know what's going on. But it's just amazing how these cycles show up. And this whole thing about you going back to church again, to me, is a full circle, but in a spiral way. Yeah. So you're back, you're able to face it. To me, it's always a big sign where I can revisit something that I rejected in the past. I'm finding a lot of that today. Whereas I used to be like, I'll never look in the back. I'll never look behind me. I used to have a rule about never going back. And now I am, and welcoming it and enjoying it. It's like, whoa, I never thought that would happen.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's just about maturity. Like, time can do so much to change your perspective on something. And so now when I go to church and I hear sometimes I still hear things I don't like, but I have the maturity to say that doesn't determine my faith or my walk with God. Like that doesn't determine, just listening to someone say something I don't agree with doesn't actually shape me. And I think that might have been my fear as a kid. Like, if I listen to this, am I gonna, I don't know. I don't know what was going on. I haven't exactly looked at that hard enough. But today I can say I can go into almost any situation and still be safe, where before, it's that chameleon thing. I always need to be safe. And I still have a strong desire for safety. I think that's normal. I think that's humans, we're built with our fight or flight system to keep us safe. But I don't have to identify so strongly with that biological, my first thought, my reaction is not always the true thing. And today I have the maturity to go, okay, well, just because I feel that way, just because that hit me that way, let's look at it. You don't have to run, you don't have to fight it. You can just stay here a minute and, look at it calmly. And for me, that's really how I best do life, is when I don't fight or flight, when I still want to, I still have that biological urge, but today I can say, okay, but I don't have to, even though I want to, even though my insides feel like getting the heck out of here, I can wait. I am safe, always. So.
Wow. That's so, that whole choice around fight or flight, because I feel it a lot too. And I think that one of the things that stands out to me is discerning, to use that word again, between when it's our own filters that are creating that kind of knee-jerk reaction of fight or flight, versus when it's an intuitive thing. And we're not going to have a huge amount of time to talk about it. So
but that's a great topic
for our next time, because it's like I want to dig into that, because there are times when it's like, whoa, I just want to go. I need to go. And there are times when there was one time in particular, that created such a visceral reaction in me that I was like, I'm trusting this. But then there are other times where it's like, am I just avoiding conflict? Because that was a part of my, chameleon thing. And there was a big thing around acceptance for me besides safety. It was safety in terms of wanting to feel accepted.
Yes.
And so is that a part of what's going on? How am I filtering this is a question I'm asking a lot more now than I don't think I ever even thought to ask it before.
That.
It's like, what are my filters? It's really interesting to ask those questions, because, and to ask people who know you really well. It's like, I had somebody look at a text that my mother had sent to me, because I knew I could feel, it's almost like I saw these filters coming in. I'm like, okay, I know that I am receiving this in a way that may not be intended, but I am definitely going to that place. So I'm like, can you look at this and just tell me if I am, is this a weird reaction? I actually asked several people, but my husband was kind of like, it doesn't seem that bad to me. And I'm like, okay, well then my intuition was right. And my reaction was based on all of that conditioning. And just really amazing and weird at the same time. Yeah. It's like, I'm not sure what to do with it all just yet, but.
No. And I think we just keep, like you said, that spiral. We just keep learning and learning, and we hit those sticky spots or that lull or that hard place, and then something emerges. I don't know if you've seen, there's a meme about creativity, and it talks, like, the first couple of lines are like, I'm awesome, this is great. And then it's like, I'm shit, this is terrible. And then it goes back to like, okay, this is not so bad, it's all right. And I think we just go there. That's something that, and once I learned, that's part of the process of being a creative person and of living this life, that we just go through these, like, that's normal. Anytime I can normalize what's strange or feeling like, why do I do that? Because I self-shame. That's something I struggle with. And so when I can normalize what's happening, like, oh, it's normal that I have filters. We all have filters. Then it's like I can look at them with grace, instead of like anytime I try to get rid of something about me that I don't like, it doesn't go well for me either. So I think it's really cool.
I hear you. Well, Nicole, I cannot actually believe it myself, but we're out of time. I know. And we didn't talk about a whole lot of resources for show notes, but you had said that you had some in mind. So we can do that offline. Okay, excellent. And then I will add those to the show notes for those of you watching. I see that there are some questions and things like that we typically don't answer questions directly because we want to focus on the conversations. But I will go back and read all of them and respond to what I can. If there are things specific to Nicole, I will send those to her to respond to as well. And so the one thing I didn't prepare was who I have Amber Poole coming on the first Thursday in December, but I cannot remember what that date is offhand. So the first Thursday in December, and then I have Ariel Sterling the Saturday right after that. So that first week of December, stay tuned for some cool mashups. They're all very cool. And Nicole, thank you so much for coming on, and we're going to have to do this again.
Yes, I would love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And everybody else, thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Okay, bye.